do I have a good quality of life? Next slide, please. The world's also getting richer. This is a graph of two economies, the first which we know very well, which is the US economy in blue, and the red line is China. If you think back 40 years ago, not longer, just 40 years back, most in the room were alive at the time. Many of us were actually aware of what was going on in the world at the time. China was opened up by no less a personage than Kissinger. By the way, Kissinger just wrote a brilliant book called World Order. If you haven't read it, read it. Kissinger opened up this economy and said, this is going to be the next economy. It's got so much locked-in potential that we can see it. Now, if you think a statesman is one of these iconic figures because he was able to see well over the horizon. He's 91 years old today and he can see way over the horizon. That's a remarkable quality in anyone. And indeed, what we've seen is that China has become, in just 40 years' time, the second largest economy on a purchase price parity basis on a global scale. And that's not true just of these two economies. I could put 198 other countries in between these two lines, and they will all fit. Most of them, in fact, will be in between these two lines. What does that mean? It says that overall, people are able to generate wealth more so today than ever in human history. The question is why? Why can they do that? Why was it not possible previously? Why is it suddenly possible now? Next slide. In general terms, it's true that people can, but what you see is there is a huge disparity. There is a huge disparity in the domestic product in these countries. Even China, for instance, we talk about China being the second largest economy. We never talk about China in terms of the per capita GDP. At the end of the day, that's the metric that really matters. So think about this. It's a simple math problem, right? We have a $15 trillion economy in the US with a population of 300 million people. You divide 15 trillion by 300 million and you get 50,000. On average, a human who lives in the US makes $50,000. On the same basis, today, China has a GDP of roughly $5 trillion with 1.3 billion people. Let's make it 5.2 for rounding figure purposes and divide 5.2 by 1.3, we get $4,000. The average human being in China makes $4,000. Now you could look at that and say, yeah, they're the second largest economy, but from a purchase price parity basis, they cannot spend like we do. They don't have the money to spend like we do. Next. But something else is going on, right? I talked about technology advancements. And that's where this phenomenon called the internet comes into place. This is a picture of internet penetration. If you look at it, except for the left side of the picture, which is just the two Americas, the rest of the world is only still trying to catch up. Even the left side of the picture is only about 50% saturated. Even the left side is only 50% saturated. The right side is way behind. In fact, we talk in ICANN about a 60, 70, 80 problem. A 60, 70, 80 problem. What does that mean? 60% of the world is still to come onto the internet, believe it or not. That doesn't mean that everybody in that 60% doesn't have the internet. No, it means that if you take India as an example, the penetration of the internet is about 25, 26%. So there are people who have it, but lots of people who still don't have it. So the internet itself is there, it's just that it's not deep and dense. Right? 60% of the world is still to come onto the internet. 70% of them will come onto the internet in the next 7 years. In the next 7 years, enormous investments are going in the tens of billions of dollars, because many countries are realizing that this is the platform to wealth and value creation. They don't even know why. They can't connect the dots between the internet and wealth, but they see that there is a factor. Suddenly there is increasing innovation. Things that they can never even imagine start to happen when the internet comes into being. I'll give you an example. Kenya got the internet less than 10 years back. Today, there is a service that is headquartered out of Kenya called M-Pesa, M-P-E-S-A, which is a mobile payment scheme using a dumb phone, not even a smartphone, leave alone an iPhone. You can use a dumb phone, and you can transfer money from anyone to anywhere in all of Africa. They have more transactions on M-Pesa today than MasterCard did in the US in the year 1990, 25 years ago. Imagine that. They have more M-Pesa transactions today than MasterCard did 25 years back. The volumes are enormous. It's guaranteed transactions. And there is a platform in every country in sub-Saharan Africa with M-Pesa. Why did it happen? Because the internet came into being. It's as simple as that. How did it happen? Well, two guys got together in a garage in Nairobi and decided that we're going to try this experiment. And the result is wealth and value creation. Moore's law, in the meantime, is marching along. Many of us who are in technology talk about this, where Gordon Moore, one of the people who was responsible for founding this brilliant company called Intel many years ago, he made a prediction. He said that every 2 years, on average, the number of transistors on a square inch of wafer will double. Wow, that's pretty cool. What happens when the number of transistors goes beyond some number? Well, nobody thought about that. We kept pushing technology saying, let's make this real. We've been doing that steadily for about 40, 45 years now. Every 2 years, it's doubled in power. And the cost has fallen by a factor of 2 as a result, every 2 years. So today, you can buy a small computer that you can use for whatever you want for $300 bucks. Well, 10 years ago, you'd have paid $3,000 for a clunker that was at least 10 times larger and had about a tenth of the processing power. It's brilliant that the cost of computing is going down. Why is it brilliant? Because you can start now to think of smartphones at a price point of $300, which is what you get. You can buy a BlackBerry or a Google Android or even an iPhone at the lower end of the spectrum for $300 bucks. What does that processing power mean? Well, think about it. In 1969, we put a man on the moon and brought him back. At some point in my career, I had an opportunity to spend some time with Neil Armstrong. And I asked him, I said, what kind of a computer did you have to help you? He's an elderly gentleman at the time, so he looked at me and said, well, son, it was bigger than the desk that we're sitting around. And it had something called memory. He was not a computer guy, he's clearly an astronaut. So he said it had something called memory, and there was like something called 64 kilobits of memory, I think. And he said, it took me and Buzz at least a day to figure out what to do next. So we would discuss it before we went to bed every night. And next morning, one of us would wake up and we would feed it instructions. And occasionally it would tell us that it ran out of memory. So he used that contraption to take him to the moon and back. We take this device for granted. This has got more horsepower than 100 of those computers in the palm of our hand today because of this Moore's law. Next slide, please. And at the same time, if you think about the companion to processing, it's storage. We need data. That's the reason we process stuff. We capture data, we process the data, and then we output that in the form of information that can be useful. The cost of storing data has been plummeting for the last 40 years. It's plunging. I remember just 15 years ago paying $1,000 to get 1 meg on a spinning disk. I can get a meg in solid state for about $2 today. And that may be expensive.
It's free.
So this is the next factor. Next slide, please. And interestingly, because of this kind of innovation and computing capability, we're finding people making very interesting choices. There are 3 arcs that you see: blue, red, and green. What you see there is the pace at which people are buying these technologies as new generations come up. This is a scatter plot of many different countries where people are buying into new generations of telephony. And what you see is that even in the poorest of poor countries, given a choice between new technology and buying more food, people are buying new technology first. It's very interesting because this new technology is becoming a gateway for knowledge. And somewhere people are making the connection that knowledge leads to wealth and value creation. If they have nothing other than a smartphone, they're willing to invest in that smartphone. In most of the world that doesn't have the internet, their first screen will be a mobile screen. In fact, it'll be the only screen. They will never buy a PC. They don't need one. One of these mobile devices is all that they'll ever need. Next slide, please. So this is the world of mobile telephony as a result. Look at the penetration rates. Amazingly, Russia has one of the highest rates of penetration. On average, they have 2 phones per head. But you see a lot of yellow, which is 100%. Now that doesn't mean that everybody has a phone. It just means that there is at least 1 phone for everybody. So the same person could have 3 phones. So this is not a density distribution function, but it's an absolute number distribution that I'm showing you. Next slide, please. Smartphones are beginning to dominate.